Hi, YouTubers. Welcome back to the Manifest Justice Law Corporation YouTube page. It's the weekend, so I'm a little bit off. And also, I'm outside in my backyard, not mic'd up, and my neighbors are getting their lawns worked on. So I'm quite distracted because I'm realizing there's a lot of noise. And I apologize for that in advance, but I'm going to record anyway because I've had some folks reaching out on the channel and I want to answer their questions ASAP. And this is the time I have a free second. So we welcome the noise and we say, "Yay, life is lifing." And isn't that a blessing in and of itself, I guess? Shout out in advance to, if I haven't said it already, shout out in advance to our video editor, Sally. Thank you so much in advance for trying to do your best in cutting out all of the background noise that may or may not occur and that you, the listener, may or may not be hearing. But we're gonna give Sally a shout out anyway because honestly, this channel wouldn't exist without her. So thank you, Sally. Today, we are going to respond to one of our first channel questions from a viewer. Because we have our first audience member with a semi-anonymous username and seems like profile, I'm going to go ahead and give them a shout out. But if ever I see someone reaching out with a username that does not seem to be anonymous, I will just not disclose your information because I don't want opposing counsel to subpoena your search records of your computer, which is highly likely in litigation, and then to see all the videos and comments that you've left for me. So I'm trying to do my best to protect my YouTube friends, but so that's just a little tip for anyone listening. But Slim the Connect, shout out who to our listener who asked an amazing question and is protecting themselves with an anonymous username. So Slim the Connect reached out and said that they wanted to know a little bit more about ADA and FMLA in Virginia. So my first bit of response to that is that I am not licensed to practice law in Virginia state. I am licensed to practice law in California and Washington states. So I'm not going to be able to give you any Virginia specific information, but luckily the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act, and the FMLA, the Family and Medical Leave Act, those are both federal statutes. So they apply to every state in the country in the United States of America. So we're going to focus on talking about those. And then I'm also going to explain why it would be important to focus on California or Washington or Virginia specific laws. Hi, sweetie pie. Okay, if you have a lab, you know about this. They're obsessed with playing ball. Obsessed. And even though she was just laying down, as soon as she smells and remembers that she's outside and there's a ball and where she can play, you're gonna see that happen throughout this video. I'm gonna try to ignore her 'cause she's distracting, but she's distracting, so it's hard to ignore her. You know, I swear they already covered this part of the yard, and they should not be this close and this loud. But no, I'm sure they're doing a fantastic job, and shout out to all of our gardeners. You can see my little greenhouse here, and I have more that you can't see. I'm a little baby gardener in pretend training mode. So shout out to the gardeners. Maybe one day I will show the channel some of my fruitful plants. Either way. Okay. For folks who don't know, 1 in 4 Americans are diagnosed with a disability. 1 in 4 Americans has a disability, lives with a disability, either physical, non-physical, limited, non-limited, permanent, whatever. And so if you yourself don't have a disability or you yourself have never been diagnosed with a disability, um, you know, you probably know, chances are you probably know someone with a disability, whether you know that you know someone with a disability or not. Because like even me, I have a disability, but it's non-visual. You can't see it. There are a lot of people in this country who live, work with, manage, have complete lives with disabilities, okay? So I've had another idea. I'm going to make another video on this channel talking about the shame surrounding disability because there's a lot. That's part of why I wanted to take the time and just throw that statistic out here real quick so that we all know here on the channel that like having a disability, even though it's not the majority of people in our country who necessarily have a disability, it's a high number of people who have a disability in our country. And specifically in California, I think it's like 38%. So it's higher than even that 25, 1 in 4%. That I just mentioned for countrywide statistics. So Yeah, so I'll make another video about that at a different time. And just on a quick note, there's no shame. There's a huge community surrounding uh, those of us with disabilities. So the Americans with Disabilities Act applies to employers who employ 15 or more employees, and it can apply to either private employers or public employers, like private businesses and companies or public government owned, whatever business agencies, entities. I like personally the ADA more than the Family and Medical Leave Act because the ADA provides more. Mackenzie, you have to stop. She has to stop. I bet that her huffing and puffing is louder than the lawnmowers, quite frankly. And Jada, I'm okay. There's no need to come and try to give me love and hugs and support like the way that she's doing right now. She's demanding it. Um, but either way, she's probably just upset because she knows ADA and FMLA. They upset me, ADA and FMLA. They upset me because um compared to California state laws, they provide less protection overall. That's why when I say I can't talk to you about Virginia laws, it's important that you do go and look up Virginia law because federal laws only apply the ground floor of protections. Okay. For example, under the under state law of California or even like in Washington, for example, they both say under the like in California, we have the Fair Employment and Housing Act. And then in Washington, we have the Washington Laws Against Discrimination Act. And so under both of those statutes, they'll define disability as any limitation, anything that limits condition or diagnoses that limits a major life activity. So that's what happens in Washington and California. They say anything that limits any condition that limits any major life activity, and whether that's a physical limitation, a physical disability, or mental or emotional limitation. But then under the federal laws, like under ADA and under FMLA, they don't describe disability as anything that medical condition that limits a major life activity. They define disability as anything medical condition that substantially limits a major life activity. So that is a much higher burden to meet. That's much harder to prove and establish that you are a person with a disability if we're just looking at federal laws versus if we were adding on the additional state laws that exist in California or Washington. So for Slim to connect or anyone who doesn't live in California or Washington, look for your state laws and you can literally just Google what is the equivalent of FEHA, the Fair Employment and Housing Act. What is the equivalent of FEHA in Virginia or in Maine or New York or something like that? And then you'll be able to see what those laws are. At least you'll get a starting point and you'll be able to see what the additional protections are. So because I'm not licensed to practice law in Virginia state, I'm not going to go into the state laws, but it would matter because we want additional protections. And the Americans with Disability Act, it only applies to employers or public or private employers with 15 or more. But another difference of an example is like in California, the disability protections apply to employers who employ 5 or more people. So 5 or more people is far fewer people than 15 people, right? So it applies to more employers in California. It's easier for employers to be held liable than it would be, and in Washington, than it would be in if we're just looking at a federal claim. Okay, so that's one thing about the difference between federal and state law. Now, ADA is for employers with 15 or more employees. Family and Medical Leave Act, that's why I don't like it, is because it only qualifies to employers, private or public, but employers who employ 50 or more people. So only like medium to large size companies, you know what I mean? Like bigger companies that have 50 or more employees. So slim to connect, if you are working at a company or if you're being harmed by a company or have been previously harmed by a company, and you're looking into ADA and FMLA and how that can apply to you, I really, really want to urge you, Slim to Connect, and everyone else who's listening to this, look at your state laws. Look at your state laws. And you can even say, like, you can even use FMLA and ADA in your Google search. And you can say, like, what is the state version of ADA or FMLA in Virginia or in New York? Look up your state laws to know what additional coverage you have. Because what ends up happening is that the federal laws and the state laws that apply to your state within your state jurisdiction, they kind of merge together as one big protection package for the employees and or employers in that state. So even federal rule is that it has to be under ADA, an employer who employs 15 or more employees, and under FMLA, it's 50 or more employees. Under California law, it's only 5. California or Washington, it's only 5 employees or more. So then that means there's far more employers who are on the hook and could be liable and need to be protecting their employees than if I were just looking at federal. And what you do when laws conflict, like for example, 50 employees versus 15 employees versus 5 employees, you take whichever law provides the most coverage for employees. So whatever your state says, we'll go ahead and override whatever the federal limitation or level is, because the federal only sets the ground floor and then states add additional protections on top of that. I'm going to just be saying that until I think I like for the rest of my life, probably. Probably for the rest of my life. Okay, so that's the Americans with Disabilities Act. That is to little coverage of the Family and Medical Leave Act. And then I wanted to also cover the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. That's another federal protection. Again, in California, California really leads the nation in protecting pregnant workers and pregnant families. But Washington also does a really great job. Federally, we're all right. Okay, so federally, the Pregnant Works Fairness Act, that implies, just like the ADA, it applies to private or public employers who employ 15 or more employees, and it typically protects anyone who's going through any pregnancy-related medical issue that may need time off or a reasonable accommodation or any other assistance or help or resources. So those are 3 federal laws if you are facing any kind of like disability or medical related issue in your employment: Americans with Disability Act, ADA, the Family and Medical Leave Act, FMLA, and the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, the PWFA. Those are the 3 that I want you to look into. And because state laws combine with the federal laws to provide the overall protection package, that's kind of why I'm a little bit clumsy in talking about just the federal statutes, because if I were representing clients in Washington or California, I wouldn't be relying on only those federal statutes to protect my clients and point out all the ways that the employer fucked up. I would be more on the state laws to protect my clients who are in California or Washington, because there are additional protections. So just focusing on federal laws is a little clumsy for me, because those aren't the strongest laws that provide the most protection most cases. So I'm not as well versed on them because I just throwing them out like gang, gang, gang. The last thing I want to say is about the Family and Medical Leave Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, is that all 3 of those, under certain situations, can also apply to a family member who has a condition, right? So especially with the Family and Medical Leave Act, that's really, really built and designed to protect workers who, like, you're working, but you also have a disabled full-time son at home, or you're working, but you're also the caretaker of your parent who is battling cancer, or just any of those kinds of circumstances where, like, recognizing that people are not independent entities. Commonly, we are like, social beings with interconnected networks that extend further beyond just the individual person. And to be able to show up as an individual person, those extensions, those immediate extensions of yourself, have to be covered and taken care of. And so, like, when something's going on, there needs to be laws in place, which there are, the ADA, the FMLA, the PWFA, laws in place to protect workers so that they can, like, have lives and tend to their families in addition to having job security. That's mostly what I want to say about the ADA, the FMLA, and the PWFA. There are more. This was a very broad just shout out for more information from Slim to Connect. So shout out to Slim to Connect again for bringing this topic to the channel, because when I've been focusing on defining discrimination, retaliation, harassment, I've really been focused on like California based laws, and these are again like more broad. But so shout out Slim to Connect for bringing this to the channel. But if I didn't do a great job on this, or if Slim to Connect, you wanted more information on this, please let me know. Like, comment, share, like message me individually. Let me know though that you want more information, and be a little bit more specific about what you want, and I will make another video. I hope this was helpful though. I hope this was informative. I hope this was empowering. And at the end of the day, I hope that somehow this helps you get paid. I'm gonna go check on these girls, and I'm gonna try to slap out one more video we'll see how it goes. But if not, whatever. Have a good day. Enjoy your weekend. Go touch grass, even if it's fake grass. Go outside, feel the air, hear the sounds. And that's on that. Team Sierra. Okay. Bye. Bye, Elle. Have a good day. Bye.